By the end of this video, you will be much more capable of playing with oils like a pro, and you will comprehend better how oil painting works. As a professional, I'm gonna give you 5 oil painting tips that I wish someone had told me as a beginner. The first thing to do before starting anything is to prepare your canvas. Canvases have a lot of texture and they tend to soak up the paint because they have a harsh texture, they're not soft. And you want to work on a soft surface to feel the paint sliding on the canvas. It's so nice and pleasant when there is no resistance. So, to prep your canvas, you will need gesso and sandpaper. You just have to apply a thin layer of gesso, then let it dry and sand it. And repeat this process until you have a soft and even surface. Tip inside the tip. Apply very thin layers of gesso or else you will have cracks everywhere. My second tip is to plan your idea very well because oil paint takes days to dry. So if you're not organized properly, you may encounter a lot of problems. Like colors that are mixing together on your canvas where you don't want them to. So you have to know what you're gonna do before doing it. If you want to help a little bit with the drying time problem, you can use quick dry mediums like Liquin, which can make your paint dry in under a day, which is very helpful. Planning your painting is also very important if you want to follow the fat over lean rule, which is my next tip. But what does fat over lean mean, first of all? It's one of the most confusing things you can hear as a beginner, but don't worry, do not panic! It's quite easy actually. Fat or thick and lean or thin indicates the amount of oil there is in your paint. A paint diluted only with oil is fat, and if it's diluted only with solvent, it's lean. So it's important to put the thin paint first and the thick paint on top of it, because solvent dries a lot faster than oil. So if you put thick paint under thin paint, the layer on top will dry before the layer underneath and it will crack. So to dilute my paint, I like to use 100% solvent for the first layer, then I mix 75% solvent with 25% linseed oil for the second layer. Then 50-50 for the third layer, then 25 solvent, 75 oil, and if there's still a layer to add, 100% linseed oil. And the good news is that I found a trick to measure all of that very easily. I use an old saline pipette, I press on it once, and when I release it, it gives me a dose. So if I need 75% solvent and 25 oil, I put 3 doses of solvent and 1 dose of oil, and I use this mix to dilute my paint. My next tip, which is in continuity with the last one, is to work with layers. But how? What to put on top of what? It's kind of confusing at the beginning. Well, my favorite method is to block in the shapes first, like make a sketch on your canvas. Then place the colors roughly. Don't try to put any kind of detail at this point. Just place your values, colors and contrast where they need to be. And then the next layer is for details. That way you build your painting little by little, and you will see that it's much easier to be consistent in your style than if you try to paint all the details from the start. And it's also a lot easier to focus on details once you have already blocked in the colors and contrast. Because if there's no layer of anything underneath, you have to focus on values, colors, shapes and details, and it makes a lot, isn't it? Next tip is to not make your paint too liquidy when you work on those details. Especially if you want to make it stick on top of a wet layer, it won't work. It will mix with the colors underneath. So do not hesitate to take big chunks of paint on your brush, so that you can drop the paint on top of your canvas without pressing with the brush at all, so you don't mix it with the colors below. And this also works if the colors underneath is already dry, because if your paint is very liquid, it can become transparent, especially if you try to put a light color on top of a darker one. Anyways, if you're a beginner, I'm sure you're gonna love my last video where I explain step by step how to create a painting completely from imagination.